is pretty heavy. Sorry, my cat just jumped up. Yeah, this one's pretty heavy. Couple of heartbreaking bits in it. So probably the heaviest case I've done yet. So this is the case of the Hungerford massacre. On the 19th of August 1987, one of the worst massacres in recent British history occurred. Michael Robert Ryan was born on the 18th of May 1960. He was the only child of parents Alfred and Dorothy Ryan. Alfred worked for a local government agency as a building inspector, and he sadly died from cancer in 1985 at the age of 80. His mother, Dorothy, was 19 years younger than Alfred, and she worked as a school dinner lady. And later on she worked at Elcott Park Hospital as a waitress. Michael went to Hungerford Primary School, and then he went on to John O'Gaunt School before studying at Newbury College when he was 16. He didn't complete college, however, and he dropped out. Now, some articles when I was researching said that he at some point worked as an antique dealer, but it was never confirmed, and so I don't know whether he actually did. In April 1987, just 4 months before the massacre, he started working as a labourer for Newbury District Council. He would work on public footpaths and fences. However, in July, he left his job and he returned to claiming benefits. And that's pretty much all I could find about his childhood and his background and his parents and everything. So now we'll get on to what happened, or the lead up and such. On the 2nd of February 1978, Michael would be granted a shotgun licence certificate. On the 11th of December 1986, he would be granted a further firearms licence, allowing him to legally own 2 pistols. The terms of these licences stated that he could only use them at approved gun ranges. In his application, he stated that he would be using them at Dunmore Shooting Club Centre, and he was also a registered member at Wiltshire Shooting Centre Rifle Club. He would later apply to have his licence amended. Excuse me. Why do I throw to do that at the worst possible time? He would later apply to have his licence amended to cover a 3rd pistol, so that he could sell one he owned and buy 2 more. This amendment was granted on the 30th of April 1987. On the 14th of July 1987, he was approved for yet another amendment. No, sorry, that's wrong. He applied for yet another amendment, which was granted on the 30th of July. This one allowed him to own 2 semi-automatic rifles. licensed to legally own 8 firearms, and he purchased these between December 1986 and the 8th of August 1987. So, I know nothing about guns because, I'm British and we don't really have them legally, so these are the ones that he owned. No idea if I'm pronouncing them correctly, but he had a Beretta 9mm pistol, a Zabala shotgun, a Browning shotgun, a Bernadelli pistol, a self-loading pistol, a Type 56 semi-automatic rifle, and an M1 carbine rifle. It was the Type 56 that he used most during the massacre, and that fired at least 86 shots. And he also used the M1 and the Beretta, which is the 9mm. So we used the Type 56 semi-automatic rifle the most. I got the M1 carbine rifle and the Beretta 9mm pistol. So in total the number of shots fired was at least 119, which, wow. So on the morning of the 19th of August, sorry, I was just going back to check when he purchased his last firearm, and that was the 8th of August, and then, again with my throat, so yeah, and I'm assuming that was the semi-automatic that he purchased on the 8th, because that's when he was approved. Like, he was approved just before that, so yeah, the 8th, he'll have purchased the semi-automatic. Again, that was his most used one, and the incident was on the 19th. So, on the morning of 19th of August 1987, 35-year-old Susan Godfrey and her 2 young children were having a picnic in Save a Snake Forest. At 12:30, Michael approached the family. Susan could see he was clearly armed. Susan managed to get her children safely in the car before Michael forced her to walk about 100 yards at gunpoint. He then shot her 13 times, killing her. A little later, a woman walking in the woods found the children alone in the car. When she approached them, they told her that a man in black had killed their mummy. And when I read that, it just broke my heart. Those poor kids. I really hope they were far enough away not to have seen it, but just horrible. When Michael left the forest, he went to the Golden Arrow petrol station near Froxfield. He filled up his car, and then, after another customer left, he shot at the cashier from the forecourt. He then entered the shop and attempted to shoot her point blank, but fortunately Unfortunately, the gun either jammed or the magazine had detached. Thankfully, the cashier was okay, and Michael quickly left. The cashier dialed 999. The customer who had left earlier had already called the police, telling them they had seen an armed robbery. 2 patrol cars were sent to the petrol station, and at this point they were unaware of the murder of Susan Godfrey, as that call had been dealt with by a different police force. So at this point in time there were 2 manhunts underway with 2 separate investigations, and no idea that the 2 manhunts were looking for the same man. When Michael left the petrol station, he returned to his home on South View that he shared with his mother in Hungerford. He arrived at around 12:45 p.m. Neighbours who saw him arrive home said he appeared upset. Little warning here, this next 10 seconds upsetting, so just skip ahead 10 to 20 seconds if you don't want to see. So, not long after he was seen entering the house, shots were heard. Michael had shot his 2 family dogs. That's the animal upsetting bit over. There's no more now. After this, he exited the house with things such as ammunition, survival equipment, and a flak jacket. I don't really know what that is, I probably should have found out. After failing to start his car, he went back into the house and set it on fire using the petrol he had just bought. He then left and headed towards some school playing fields. On his way there, he fatally shot 2 of his neighbours, Roland and Sheila Mason. A 14-year-old nearby heard these shots, and when she came out to see what had happened, Michael shot her 4 times in the legs. Thankfully, her mother and a neighbour came to help her, and she survived. A 77-year-old neighbour would yell at Michael for scaring everyone to death. For some reason, I don't know why, not that I know why he did any of this, but he didn't shoot this woman. But he did shoot and wound a woman named Marjorie Jackson. He shot her in the back, and she was one of the neighbours who had seen him arrive home. So when she'd been shot, she phoned her friend named George White for some help and asked him to collect her husband from work. Michael continued on foot past the playing fields and towards the town common. 51-year-old Kenneth Clements was out walking his dog with his family when he became Michael's next victim and was sadly shot and killed. His family escaped without injury. So now the time is approximately 12:50 p.m. and the police had linked the incident at the Froxfield petrol station to the many, many calls they were receiving in Hungerford. At this point, Michael went back to South View. Police officers arrived and blocked both entrances to the road shot at them, and he shot at PC Roger Brereton. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Hitting him in the chest. And this caused PC Brereton to crash his patrol car into a telegraph pole. Michael seized this opportunity, and at approximately 12:58 p.m. he shot and killed PC Brereton whilst he was on his radio to report an active shooter and that he was injured. Michael remained on Southview, and he shot at a mother and daughter who had just turned into the street in their car. Both were hit, but the mother managed to reverse back out and to safety. Next, Michael fired at an ambulance crew responding to the incident. Thankfully, both paramedics managed to escape without major injury. Kenneth Clement's son then told police, who were trying to secure the area, that Michael had continued west on Southview. When they headed in that direction, Michael shot at them. One officer was able to seek shelter in a house, whilst the other, who was still with Kenneth's son, drove across the common to safety. At 1:12 p.m, this officer requested backup from the Tactical Firearms Unit. Unfortunately, the unit was training 40 miles away, and they wouldn't have all their officers at the scene until 2:20 p.m. PC Jeremy Woods then set up a makeshift command unit on the common, around 500 yards away from Southview. Sadly, George White, who Marjorie had earlier called for help after being wounded, was then shot and killed as he drove onto Southview with Marjorie's husband, Ivor. Ivor managed to survive despite serious injuries by feigning death. Michael headed to the junction of Southview and Fairview Road, where he shot and killed 84-year-old Abdur Khan, who was out gardening. He then fired at and injured a nearby pedestrian. Another police officer in attendance attempted to make another 999 call, but the telephone network was at capacity. Can you hear the geese? There is a massive flock of geese going over. Back on Southview, Michael's mother, Dorothy, returned from shopping to see Michael armed. She shouted for him to stop, and Michael responded by shooting her 4 times, twice of which were at point blank range, and killing her. So he killed his own mother. Michael then headed back towards the common, and a resident shouted to him to kindly stop that racket. Michael shot her in the groin. At 1:18 p.m, 2 armed officers arrived at the command station on the common. 2 minutes after arriving, they could see Michael at the War Memorial Recreation Grounds. At this point, Michael shot and killed 26-year-old his guns, the one that had been inoperable since the Broxfield petrol station incident. He then headed up Pulpit Lane and shot and killed a taxi driver named Marcus Barnard. Then he headed north to Priory Avenue. There was a person parked in a van who he shot at and injured. The police... Sorry, I've typed that weirdly. The police had now set up diversions, and that unfortunately meant people were now heading in the same direction as Michael. And he would shoot and injure some of them. Two of these people were Douglas and Catherine Wainwright, who were visiting their son on Priory Avenue. The diversion forced them to approach from the south, and Michael was heading north, I think, at this point. So they're going to cross paths. When they were almost at their son's home, only about 100 yards away, Michael shot at them, killing Douglas and injuring Catherine. He then shot another two drivers who survived. Close to the junction of Priory Avenue and Terence Hill, he shot at a van, killing the driver named Eric Vardy. So now it's 1:30 p.m. So this has been going on for almost an hour at this point. So Michael headed down Orchard Park Close to reach Priory Road, and he shot at multiple houses en route. 22-year-old Sandra Hill would then drive past Michael, and he shot and killed her. After killing Sandra, Michael forced his way into the house of 66-year-old Jack Gibbs and his wife, 62-year-old Myrtle. Both were shot. Jack died instantly, and Myrtle would die in hospital 2 days later. When he left their house, he shot at the houses opposite, injuring the people inside. Continuing south on Priory Road, he shot once at a passing car driven by Ian Playle, aged 34. His wife and two children were also in the car, but they escaped without injury. However, Ian was shot in the neck and died 2 days later in hospital. A police helicopter finally arrived at 1:45 p.m. and they broadcast warnings to the public. At this time, another person was shot and injured outside a house on Priory Road. Michael started heading towards John O'Gaunt School, which thankfully was closed for the summer holidays. However, the caretaker was there, and he reported seeing a man enter one of the school buildings at 1:52 p.m. The firearms unit secured the surrounding houses and gardens before... Today isn't going well, is it? That's my stomach grumbling. I am so sorry. Firearms Unit secured the surrounding houses and gardens before surrounding the school at 4 p.m. More officers were sent to the scene at 4:40 p.m. after shots were heard in the building. At 5:15 p.m, at least one more shot was heard, and it's believed to have been aimed at the police and press helicopters hovering above. At this point, they didn't actually know his precise location within the school, as although the caretaker had reported seeing a man entering the building, it wasn't a confirmed sighting of Michael. They would finally see him and confirm it was Michael in the school at 5:26 p.m. after he threw out one of his guns out of a third-floor window. Now that they knew for sure he was in the surrounded school building, emergency services were able to access the previous areas that had been in lockdown in order to treat and try and save the victims. The fire that had started at his home had now spread to destroy 3 other properties, and his own property as well. There were now 2 police helicopters circling the school building. Michael would shoot at both of them in an attempt to bring them down. A line of communication was opened between a sergeant in the Tactical Firearms Unit and Michael. He engaged and informed them of his arsenal, ammunition, and he also claimed he had a grenade. He refused to exit the building until he was informed of his mother's welfare and said, quote, "Hungerford must be a bit of a mess," unquote. Michael stated that he had shot his mother by mistake, to which the sergeant said he understood. Reportedly, Michael responded with, quote, "How can you understand? I wish I'd stayed in bed," unquote. Later, he would shout, quote, "It's funny, I killed all those people, but I haven't got the guts to blow my own brains out," unquote. After a few minutes of silence, at 6:52 p.m, a single shot was heard. They could no longer get a response from Michael because they couldn't really confirm the extent of Michael's arsenal, whether he really had a grenade or whether he'd set booby traps. They couldn't enter straight away and had to devise an operation plan to enter. This went ahead at 8 p.m, and at 8:10 p.m, police would find Michael dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. So, the total number of casualties were 15 injured and 17 dead, including Michael. In the aftermath, the police would do a sweep and find at least 78 bullet holes in just 15 vehicles. The Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher, visited Hungerford. She said that if gun control laws needed to be tightened up to prevent more events like this, then of course it will be considered. Over the following weeks, the funerals of the victims would take place, and the residents of Hungerford would come together to grieve. There was an inquest coroner recommended that semi-automatic weapons should not be generally available, and an individual should not be allowed to own an unlimited amount of arms and ammunition. Normally, the town was policed by 2 sergeants and 12 constables. However, the inquiry found that on the day there was only 1 sergeant, 2 constables, and 1 station duty officer on duty. The inquiry found that the lack of a full force on duty could have factored into why Michael wasn't traced and contained rapidly. The communications line would also face criticism, especially the fact that Newbury Exchange couldn't handle the amount of phone calls being made. On a normal day, it would handle around 30,000 calls, but this increased to 800,000 calls on the day of the incident, with people trying to contact emergency services and loved ones. This led to significant delays in reports, which then led to out-of-date information, regarding where he was. So if someone rang at, 1:02 p.m. to say he's just shot at my house, but they couldn't get through for 15 minutes, well, he's long gone, isn't he? And then it also duplicated reports as a result of the oversaturation. British Telecoms put in measures to relieve stress on the network, which freed up communication for the police. So the police force had 13 mobile phones, because remember, late 80s, and mobile phones weren't really around. But the cellular network was blocked from public use to ensure that the police mobiles worked and were clear for communication. They believe that the arrival of the police helicopter is what led to Michael seeking refuge in the school. However, there were at least 4 private helicopters thought to be the press and media, and that hampered the investigation as it caused issues with communications and transmissions. The inquiry found that the guns were owned legally by Michael, and this led to the Firearms Act 1988, which banned ownership of semi-automatic weapons. It also restricted the use of shotguns with a capacity of more than 3 cartridges. Following the introduction of this act, an amnesty amassed over 48,000 firearms. In June of 1988, P.C. Brereton was posthumously awarded the Queen's Commendation for brave conduct. Now obviously, Michael isn't around to explain why he did it, but there are theories. And newspapers would claim that he was motivated by video nasties. But due to the fire and the destruction of the house and the fact that Michael's no longer around, couldn't really be investigated. The press would also claim that he was obsessed with violent videos, firearms, and had owned several magazines about firearms and survival skills. Michael didn't have any prior criminal convictions, nor any known medical conditions suspected that Michael suffered from acute schizophrenia. A psychologist stated that he believed the first murder in the forest may have been sexually motivated. This is due to the discovery of a ground sheet near Susan's body. They believed that this could suggest he was planning to essay her. He doesn't believe that the shootings after that were planned, and suggested he may have been influenced by the Hoddle Street massacre in Melbourne, Australia, just 10 days prior to this incident. After the incident, the Hungerford Tragedy Gardens were established to memorialise the victims. The majority of residents refer to the incident as the tragedy, and to say the massacre can be considered offensive. However, Marjorie Jackson, who was wounded and lost her husband, said that she disagrees and that it was a massacre and there's no two ways about it. So, that's the case of the Hungerford tragedy. And it's just heartbreaking, really, isn't it? I don't really know what to say about this one. It's quite obvious that there was issues like with the police and phone lines and everything. Maybe if things hadn't been like that, maybe he wouldn't have been able to get to so many people. I'm just glad that the Firearms Act was brought in after this and it was completely tightened up. I mean, I know people still get them illegally, but thankfully the law has been tightened. So yeah, that's the case. I'm sorry if this was a bit choppy and stop. I'm sorry that I apparently can't get my words out and that my stomach's rumbling and my throat is making weird noises. Apparently today just isn't my day. Sorry if my throat is doing it now. Yeah, today isn't my day. So, I'm gonna go and hibernate. I am setting up a little tip jar type thing. I think it's called Ko-fi, is it? Or something like that, but I'm gonna set that up. The only reason I'm setting it up is because I really want to buy a better mic. But I can't afford it, basically. I am saving up, but it'll take a while, so if you would like to support the channel and can continue to get some true crime cases out there, then the tip jar link will be in the description. So, I think that's it. I don't think there was anything else I was going to say. I don't like to ramble at the beginning of the video, because I think if people like me, they prefer it. Hey, hi, this is what we're doing today, and then going straight into it, as opposed to going again. I have a little ramble at the end, just because I can. And I feel like if people are watching to the end, then like a little ramble then can get to do me a little bit. Maybe, I don't, at this point I have no idea what I'm saying, so I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna hibernate, and hopefully I'll be back next week with a new case, and I'm pretty sure I know what next week's case is gonna be. Well, there's like 3 fairly local-ish cases.